So you're looking to shop for a graphics card, but you've no idea where to start. There's a lot to sift through, and I'm gonna try my best to condense this into a 10-minute or less video. There's gonna be a lot of data to unpack. I'm gonna be very blunt with you, very direct about what I would and wouldn't entertain both in the new and used markets. Hopefully you find this one useful. Are you ready? Stay with me. To get rid of that annoying Windows activation watermark, head on over to VIP SCD Key. Purchase a Windows 10 Pro OEM key for a fraction of the price of retail. Just use a secure payment method like PayPal, enter your product key into your PC settings window, and say bye-bye to the watermark. And be sure to use our offer code SKGS for a sweet discount. Say you're jumping into this whole thing only interested in new cards. I think, my friends, that is your first mistake.
You sure about that?
There are a couple of cards that I think are definitely worth considering, and they are right here. This is the AMD Radeon RX 6600, and I think it is hands down the best value new graphics card you can buy today at around 200 bucks. You start getting closer to 250, 275, I think that value starts to diminish quite a bit. Maybe look at something like a 6700 or 6750 XT, but this is a heck of a start and a great value option if you're interested in something around $1,000 or less for a total build budget. They're going to be extremely power efficient, this one only requiring a supplemental 8-pin, and as a result, they also run quite cool. This particular model has zero coil whine. In fact, the few 6600s I have tested haven't had coil whine at all. I think it's just a result of this being a lower power card, but overall, an excellent choice if you have to buy new. The other card worth considering is an RX 6750, which this is a Sapphire branded model, and it's beautiful. It's a very thick card, almost a 3-slot card, so be careful about fitment with some of these higher tiered units. This is gonna pack a punch in up to 1440p in modern titles. My rule of thumb for these is somewhere around the $300 price range. If you could find these for about $325, a beefier model like this with 3 fans, right, this is probably gonna be worth it. Although if you can't find a good deal on one of these, you can also find 6700s and 6700 XTs for under 300 bucks. This is a phenomenal value, I think, and I would personally choose this over the 6600 I just showed you for about $220 or so. Yeah, that's all I have. Just these two cards and their permutations. It's really about it that I'd recommend. Honorable mentions to maybe the A750, A770 if you want to jump into the Intel ring, but they're not my first choices just because the drivers are still a bit young, and it definitely shows. AMD's worked out their drivers for the 6000 series stuff for sure, much more stable than they have been historically, and same goes for the 7000 series stuff. Now I know as of time of filming, the 7800 and the 7700 I believe were just announced. Those do look compelling, the 7800 in particular, but if you're just looking for a solid 1440p or below gamer and value is of a huge concern to you, these are very tried and true. They're still very efficient. This is really it. There's nothing from NVIDIA that I would really recommend. You might get lucky and find, say, an RTX 3060 or something like that for maybe $200 to $250, but there's still a premium. There's still a green tax on a lot of those cards, even though the 3060 is a generation old now. It's just not wetting the palate enough. So I'd say stay clear of that for the most part. New, and go with Team Red. But now we come to the used listings, and my friends, you've come to the right place. At first glance, what you're about to see might seem overwhelming, but I can assure you it's actually very straightforward. We just have so many graphics cards crammed into one bar chart here that it feels a bit cluttered. The few other charts that I have for this video aren't going to be as dense, so don't worry. But in essence, what you're looking at here are a number of graphics cards, I think 64 of them. On the far left, you'll find the most recent cards that were released in terms of their launch dates, the RTX 3060 Ti being the most recent card that we started gathering data for a few years ago. And then off to the far right, the oldest cards, things like the R9 290, 290X, the GTX 780, and the original Titan. The two colors I want you to pay most attention to are the green and blue. For obvious reasons, this is the most relevant data to us, the most recent. You can see there have been significant jumps across the board with implied value between this time last year, roughly, and the present day, almost doubling in value in some cases, which would suggest that the prices of almost every one of these cards in this graph have been cut in half. Our scores that we're using are all the same. They've been constant. Of course, we expect them to change over time as drivers mature and whatnot, but I've kept the scores the same for all of these charts over the years. We gather this data from 3D Mark Time Spy. I have more explanations on how we calculate these value figures in those videos if you want to check them out. I think up top here to the left, you'll find a card for one of those if you want to dive deep into the data. But for now, I want to call out a few SKUs in particular that should definitely be on your radar if you're interested at all in buying a used card. Again, there are so many great value used cards on sites like eBay today. The first, off to the far left, you'll find an RX 5600 XT with a value score of 75.91. This suggests that for the performance in the card you're getting, these are great deals at their current going rates on eBay. This card is currently selling, believe it or not, for around $100 on average on eBay, and that is just insane. For starters, this card can pull its own weight definitely in 1080p and even some light 1440p with a lot of modern AAA titles. Just again, expect to scale back some in-game settings a bit, but overall this card outperforms anything above it, including the RTX 3070 right now and the RX 6800, both of which are going to be better performers but worse values when you take into account what they're currently selling for. RTX 3070s are okay at around 400-ish USD, but considering you're paying a quarter of the price for a 5600 XT that performs about half as good, you can see where that huge jump in value originates. So a 5600 XT is definitely where I would start. At $100, it's pretty difficult to find anything better than that is even remotely modern on this chart. Honorable mentions for cards released around the same time frame though are the RX 5500 XT, although this card is admittedly a lot weaker, the RX 5700 XT, and the RX 5700. I'm sure you're starting to see a theme here. Now, if you're a Team Green diehard, you're not gonna look at anything other than NVIDIA cards. I think the 1660, 1660 Ti's are great SKUs at these prices. You can find them for around 100 to 125 bucks. Interestingly enough, the 1660 Ti, at least as of time of recording this data, the sale data from eBay, was selling for about $25 less on average. These prices are all rounded to the nearest $25 mark, mind you. The RTX 2080 Super is also an interesting proposition. This card, of course, supports ray tracing and DLSS thanks to Turing cores. Now, as for some of the highest values on this chart, you'll notice that most of them tend to lean toward the right a bit, with the exception of maybe the 5600 XT, and this indicates that they are older models. And I understand older cards might be turn off to some of you. After all, cards like this GTX 1050, which you can find on eBay all day, dirt cheap, mind you, have shorter lifespans. I mean, you can expect these cards to die faster than their newer counterparts. That's always a risk, and that ignores the fact that a lot of these cards were likely mined with at one point or another. I wouldn't buy a 1050 anyway though, at least according to our data, 1050s and 1050 Ti's, despite them appearing like crazy deals because they're so cheap, they just don't pack a ton of performance, which means the value suffers as a result. The cards that are most noteworthy in the value department are going to be the RX 570 and 580. That shouldn't really be a surprise to many. Same goes for the 470 and 480, and oddly enough, the R9 Fury, which I really didn't see coming, but for some reason these were selling on average for around $50 on eBay, which is nuts. This puts the value almost over 100, which I've never seen before. It gets awfully close to that. It is a significantly older card. Yes, they do run very hot, but if you can find a beefy triple fan model or something, I mean, it's not the end of the world. You could still game in 1080p with this, no problem. But I've got to say at this point, even though we have data going back further than the R9 Fury in terms of release date, I wouldn't buy anything older than this. I mean, it's really difficult to even justify an R9 Fury for really any modern rig unless you just want to build something and have it up and running for a few weeks maybe, and I don't know, you're just on a really tight budget. You can't really buy anything newer that is a decent performer. So you're willing to take that astronomical risk in terms of longevity. But anything older than this is just so old that you're really not going to be able to see any real performance out of it anyway with any modern title. I mean, the 980 Ti is okay at around 77 or so. That value is pretty good, but behind a 980 Ti, you start getting cards like the GTX 780s and things that have like 3 gigs of VRAM. I wouldn't go for anything under 4 gigs of VRAM in 2023. Heck, even 4 is really cutting it close for 1080p, and it's in some cases not going to be enough. But if you're on a budget and you're only spending $50 or $100 on a card, who cares if it has 4 or 6 gigs of VRAM? 4 will be just fine as long as you manage your expectations. But yeah, anything earlier than an R9 Fury is it's just a little too old for me to really take seriously at this point. You'll find AMD cards, for the most part, both in the used market and the new market, have the upper hand in terms of value. But if you are an NVIDIA diehard and you want something older, the GTX 1070 and 1080s have been historically great value cards in the used market. Today, They're not as great of values. You can find 1070s for around 100, 125-ish USD, and GTX 1080s are right above that. Both of these SKUs have 8 gigs of VRAM apiece, which I think is fine for modern 1080p gaming, and this, again, for NVIDIA is about as old as I would be willing to go. You do have things like the GTX 950, the GTX 960, 970s, but you really start pulling back in terms of VRAM, and just the sheer ages of those cards puts me off a bit. And what the heck, while we're here, let's talk about some of the worst value cards in this chart. If for whatever reason you were suddenly attracted to a GT 710, please don't. Same goes for the Titan cards. Pretty much every Titan card in this chart is going to have a Titan tax. You'll pay anywhere between 50 and 100% above what you should be in terms of performance for a Titan card, simply because of the Titan naming. Unless you are dead set on having a Titan card to flex to your friends, like super old Titan cards, just stay away from them. Another card worth noting is the RTX 3090. This is one of the few 30 series cards that really hasn't shot up in value lately, and it's because I think there's still more of a demand for these. A few of them were manufactured, of course, just because they're more expensive. But on top of that, I think the VRAM requirements for a lot of the AI processing and 3D modeling you're running into nowadays is keeping these cards in fairly high demand, at least on the productivity side of things. The Radeon 7 is also interesting. With a value under 30, it is one of the worst values on this chart. It's not a card I would ever personally go after anyway. Like, I'm not just like building a system thinking, you know what? A Radeon 7 would be a pretty good card to throw in here. Like, it was never a popular card necessarily to begin with, and I think there are so few of them, there might be like a cult following or something around these models. You just, anytime you have one listed for sale, they get bid up a few times, and the price just, in my opinion, isn't worth it, especially considering what you get that's a lot newer today. Now, piggybacking off of what I just said about 3090s and more VRAM, I made it a point to buy this because you shouldn't. I paid $700 for this. That really hurts to say. Again, unless you can justify the higher VRAM amount. For most games, it's not gonna matter, okay? It's just not. Having 24 gigs of VRAM might be nice to brag about to your friends, but are you really going to use it? You have to ask yourself that question. Otherwise, buy a 4070 or a 4070 Ti. I hate to say it, even though I can't really get behind those cards from value perspectives either, I think they are better deals, seeing as though this is a used card and those aren't. Those are brand new, they're gonna have implied warranties. This, I'm kind of just left to my own devices. And that's a lot of money to risk on a used card like this.
If you're shopping for your next power supply, look no further than Enermax's Revolution DFX units. With their high static pressure, 6-pole motor fans, and patented self-cleaning technology, enjoy peace of mind from a PSU built with safety and durability at the forefront. And of course, each unit's built for the latest generation of graphics cards with up to 2 12-volt high power lines each, with optional 8+8 to 12+4 for additional expansion. Revolution DFX is ATX 3.0 and PCIe 5.0 ready, super compact, fully modular, and ready to rumble. Find them in wattages up to 1600 by clicking the link below.
Hopefully then you found this video helpful. My goal is just to make this as smooth a shopping and buying experience as possible. I don't want you to overpay for things. There's still a lot of overpriced listings, especially on eBay, so be diligent. I want you to be confident in what you're spending money on here. Also, I'm gonna do my best to have the raw data shown in this video linked below. So I'll have the raw Excel sheet that you can reference as you're shopping to ensure that you're paying what you should be paying for a card, at least if you value. With that, I'm gonna get out of here. Consider subscribing, liking the video, join our public Discord server. If you wanna support us on Patreon, that would be greatly appreciated. And I will catch you in the next one. My name is Greg. Thanks for learning with me.